So I'm basically just going to do a kind of a showcase really, and then raise some issues that our work has been doing. So our work on digital twins is presently part of the data storage project that's investigating the underlying evidence base for housing, property, and planning data, specifically focused on Dublin. And what we're trying to do in that project is effectively tell stories about the data and tell stories with the data. So we're kind of interested in data politics, data power, and issues around veracity and quality and so on. And our digital twin work is building on a series of other projects that we've been involved in the past. And I'm presenting this work with Ollie Dawkins, and the project is based in Maynooth University, just outside Dublin in Ireland. So just to give you a scale of this project in relation to the data stories, in the first phase, what we've been doing is investigating the data ecosystem. So if you like, this is trying to investigate the data that might end up inside a digital twin. And we've been going around talking to about 90 different organizations who we think hold some data related to housing, property planning, and conducting a lot of interviews with them and undertaken 38 data audits. And then the second phase of the project, what we're doing is 12 case studies working with different organizations or on different themes, trying to produce these data stories. So some of them are by us as the research team. We also have 7 artists and residents working on the project, so what they're doing, and then working with the stakeholders themselves, whether that's state agencies or businesses or civil society organizations. And for example, to give you an idea of this kind of like data audit kind of work that we've been doing, this is a kind of a mapping out of the entire development control planning ecosystem in Ireland and all of the different IT systems that are being used. And what we've done is reconstructed how that's put together, reconstructed all the data dictionaries for all of them, and try to work out, the veracity around some of the data and what data might be able to be used in some kind of productive way. Just to swap it back over to kind of the digital twin work. So Ollie, who's the creative technologist on the project, has been working on this for a number of years. So this is one of his first projects when he was working in CASA in London, looking at the Olympic Park and real-time data into a 3D model. Same kind of thing with real-time data monitoring kind of bats and doing on-the-fly identification of bat species. Similar kind of feeding in a traffic information into the model, working with an igloo, so placing the model into a more kind of 3D immersive where you can kind of stand inside the space and see the landscape, and again the real-time data feeding in. To work with the Energy Institute and UCL, large-scale model of the whole of England and Wales, mapping energy consumption data into by floor level and so on. And again, all the objects are kind of queryable. To working on a real-time construction site, again, looking at building interactive dashboards, but also within a 3D model and real-time information around what's going on in the construction process. So if you like, this is towards merging a BIM with a 3D model and so on. And then this is more of our more recent work, really started in around 2018, I guess 2016, 17, 18, of a 3D model of Dublin. Initially in kind of a block form with queryable buildings and so on. You can drop in data, so it becomes a data analytic environment. The bottom left here is Airbnb data. You can click on any point. You can also stick it into virtual reality and move into that space. More recently, using kind of Cesium, Google 3D, so more photorealistic kinds of model. And then also, again, going outside of the screen space into using a 3D printed model. So this is a large 3D printed model. You get the sense of the size by the person stood in front of it. So this is 3.5 meters by 2 meters, 7 kilometers by 4 kilometers of the city. We have a data projector and we just throw the data onto the model. So we're taking some of the data we have within our 3D virtual model and throwing it on. So that's the kind of the kind of the work that we've been kind of doing, and it is more, I guess, a kind of 3D visualization than a pure digital twin. And I guess this is one of the issues that we're all kind of grappling in this space, is the idea to which they're really a digital twin, where something happens in the model, changes the real world changes the model, updates. We're not quite into that space. We can certainly project in real-time data, but projecting back out the other way is a bit more tricky. And I think there are a number of challenges that most of you will be aware of around the urban digital twin operation, which is kind of coming out from that we're kind of identifying through our own work. So taking something from industrial design, which is quite a closed system, and mapping it onto a city, which is a very open city situation, is quite different. Cities are very dynamic. They have multiple tempos and rhythms and so on. They mediate all kinds of complex social technical interactions across different scales. And their urban infrastructures and operations can be planned, but they're not pre-programmed, which means there's a lot of kind of entropy in the system and change in the system, which makes it very difficult to twin. And that urban complexity limits the possibility for urban optimization. So, and if you were to try and go towards it being fully operational, the amount of variables and everything that would need to be in the system would be computationally just very difficult to do. And so more what we have is a kind of a 3D GIS with gaming interaction rather than a true digital twin. There's lots of issues around the data in terms of gaps and silences and what can be mapped. And lots of issues around veracity and validity of the data. And then just in terms of their acceptance, there are real questions here, normative questions around governance by technology. So kind of technocratic approaches into urban management and governance, transparency, accountability, all of those kinds of issues around that affect things like adoption and how people use them. Certainly in our own work, and we've actually interviewed planners about this. So we've gone into local authorities and interviewed planners, and there are fairly significant challenges and few incentives for the adoptions within those environments. So things like austerity budget, there's knowledge and skills gaps, there's workload issues, there's availability of the sufficient data, and so on. And then there are wider issues around kind of public acceptance around, particularly around ethical kinds of questions, I think, and accountability kinds of questions, on top of things like just data literacy, spatial literacy, and the ability of people to actually understand what they're viewing and to interpret and make sense of that. And if you want to know a bit more about our work, then we have a couple of papers out there. I'm sure the PDF will be circulated around afterwards. And I'll just end there.
And our next question, if I could please, Rob, is to yourself, which says, you mentioned significant gaps in data and processes. Which are the most problematic of those for you? And how might you see them being overcome?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, there's different types of gaps, right? So on the one level, you have more kind of static data, kind of administrative data and so on. And then on the other side, you've got real-time data. Now, both of them have gaps in terms of what data is available and what's open data, and you can get your hands on. Obviously, if you've got private contracts, then you're in a different kind of situation. We're working off of open data, which limits us quite significantly. So in terms of real-time data, we have transport and environment and pretty much very little outside of that. Even on the administrative data, the most significant issue is we don't really have point level data or granular level data. The data is often aggregated and at a relatively coarse spatial scale. And it's just not sufficient to be able to be running a digital twin. Now we're looking at housing planning data. And again, there's very little data that has sufficient granularity for you to construct a highly detailed data landscape where you can move towards fine-grained modeling. So that's the big issue. I mean, prior to that, the really big issue was getting a 3D model in and of itself, which is starting to be addressed now. And we were the first test partner of Ireland's new national 3D data set, which still hasn't been released as far as I'm aware. and so even just getting the base level data is quite tricky in and of itself, I think. So there's levels of gaps all over the place. The quality of the data as well. There's lots of issues around the kind of veracity and fidelity of the input data. This is nothing new to anybody who's been working in GIS for years, right? But like it's still an issue here.
Our final question, Rob, is for yourself, and it says, you're already doing a lot of work in engaging with local authorities, etc., to establish publicly available data sets and make use of data to provide interesting visualizations. Have any local authorities expressed interest in taking any of these forward as digital twin projects?
Yeah, so it varies. So I think we spoke to 7 or 8 local authorities at the time, and all of them have got interested in 3D spatial media. So beyond like digital twins into kind of AR, VR, city information modeling and BIM and so on. So they're all kind of interested in that space. And so Dublin City Council, for example, along with Smart Dublin, which is shared by the 4 Dublin authorities, do have an active digital twin program kind of going on, but it sits very much outside of the day-to-day of the local authority. It's more kind of pilot testing, exploratory kind of work rather than mainstreamed part of the everyday operational work of the local authority. And I think the big question is will it shift into the operational work of the local authority? And at the minute, they can see value in it, but unless it delivers critical, unless it maps directly onto their everyday operations, then it will get limited traction. And in most of the things they say doing within the development control, within planning, processing, planning applications, and so on, it just makes no difference. They can evaluate those planning applications without a digital twin. So why would they invest in one? So the question is what's the critical problem that digital twin solves? And at the minute, they can't see that.
Sure.
So their willingness to invest in it is limited beyond the fact that they don't necessarily have the skill set or the knowledge set to be able to do it themselves, which means they'd have to outsource it, which obviously has big budgetary implications.
Of course.
So that's I think the critical thing really is what's the key the key problem that this solves.